Solomon Adeyemi was 51 years old, and for 9 years he had believed that the foundation he had built was the most honest thing he had ever done with money. Not the company that made the money, not the investment accounts that held it, but the foundation. The Adeyemi Family Foundation for Educational Access had been his idea, his structure, his work, from the first board meeting in a borrowed conference room to the most recent grant cycle that had sent 43 young people from underserved communities in the Cincinnati metro area to college with full funding and a 4-year support structure. He had believed the foundation was the part of his life that would last past the part of his life that was about transactions. He had believed that because he had built it from the beginning to be larger than himself. The bylaws were written that way. The board was composed that way. The grant criteria were designed to function independently of his personal involvement because he had wanted, from the start, a structure that would continue to do what it was designed to do even when he was not in the room. He had not anticipated that the structure he built to outlast him would be the instrument used to remove him. He had not anticipated it because he had not built it to be weaponized. He had built it the way his father had built the school in Ibadan, with the structural logic of a man who believes that the function of an institution is the institution, not the person running it. The bylaws specified a board of between 7 and 11 members with staggered terms. The grants committee operated independently of the executive director on awards above $15,000. The finance committee had oversight of any single disbursement above $10,000. There was an annual independent audit. There was a conflict of interest policy that required any board member or staff member with a financial relationship to a potential grantee to recuse from the review. Solomon had written every one of those provisions himself, in consultation with a nonprofit governance attorney, on a Saturday afternoon in the second year of the company when the foundation was still theoretical. He had built the oversight structure to prevent the kind of thing that was apparently happening. What he had not built was a protection against the person who would use his absence from the day-to-day to quietly remove the oversight. He was sitting in the parking garage of the Marriott at Rookwood in Cincinnati on a Thursday evening in October, 3 levels below the hotel's main ballroom where the foundation's annual gala was already in the first hour of its program, when his phone showed him a photograph that arrived in a message from a board member named Dr. Constance Hale. The photograph showed a printed slide from the gala's presentation deck, currently on the screens inside the ballroom, which listed the foundation's leadership. The executive director was listed as Vivica Adeyemi. The founder was listed as the Adeyemi family. Not Solomon Adeyemi, the Adeyemi family, a collective noun that erased a specific person. He looked at the photograph for 31 seconds. He had given the keynote remarks at this gala for 8 consecutive years. He was not on the program tonight. The program had been assembled by Vivica, his wife of 14 years, who had served as the foundation's co-director for 6 of those years and as its sole executive director, on paper, for the past 7 months since Solomon had been moved to a non-executive advisory role in a board action he had not fully understood at the time it occurred. He understood it now. He sat in the parking garage and looked at the photograph and thought about what he was going to do with what he knew, which was considerably more than what the people in the ballroom currently believed he knew. What Solomon Adeyemi did in the next 90 minutes would change every assumption in that room, and the woman at the podium would not understand what was happening to her until she turned from the audience and saw, standing at the side entrance to the ballroom with a folder and a board quorum, the man whose name had just been erased from his own legacy. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from right now. And hit subscribe before you go any further, because what comes next in this story is the part that people talk about for a long time. Solomon had grown up in Ibadan, in the southwest of Nigeria, the youngest of 4 children of a secondary school principal and a nurse. His father, Emmanuel, had run his school the way serious men run institutions, with complete attention to the details that other people considered administrative and complete understanding that the administrative details were the institution. The roof that did not leak, the attendance record that was accurate, the teacher who was late twice in a month and received a conversation before a 3rd time became possible. These were the things that made a school function, and Emmanuel had believed that the function was the point, not the appearance of function, which was a distinction he had made explicitly and often. Solomon had absorbed the distinction without being able to name it until he was in his 30s and running his own operation and began to understand why certain things he built worked and certain things other people built did not. The things that worked were the ones where the function and the appearance were the same thing, where what you said was happening and what was actually happening occupied the same space. The things that did not work were the ones where the gap between those two conditions had been allowed to grow. He had come to the United States at 22 on a graduate scholarship to the University of Cincinnati, where he had studied information systems and spent 4 years developing the particular combination of technical fluency and commercial instinct that would eventually become the foundation of his company. He had stayed after graduation because a software company in Cincinnati had offered him a role that he had taken on the understanding that it was temporary, a place to develop his own project while having a salary, and which had become genuinely temporary in year 3 when he left to incorporate Adeyemi Systems Group, a business process automation firm that served mid-market manufacturing and logistics companies and that had, in the 14 years since its founding, grown to 68 employees and a revenue base of $22 million annually. He was not famous. He was known in the circles where he operated: the Cincinnati business community, the Nigerian-American professional network, the educational philanthropy sector, and the information systems consulting world, and in all of those circles he was known as the same thing. A man who did what he said, who said only what he could deliver, and who treated the people who worked for him with the kind of respect that was not performative. His operations manager, a woman named Celestine, had been with him for 11 years. His lead architect, a man named Boateng, had been with him for 9. He knew their families by name. He attended their children's milestone events when invited and did not attend when not invited because respecting the boundary of an invitation was the same as respecting the person. He met Vivica at a Cincinnati Art Museum benefit in the year he founded the company. She was 40 to his 37, worked in nonprofit development, and had the particular skill set of a woman who had spent 15 years raising money from wealthy people. The ability to make the person across from her feel that their giving was the most significant thing happening in the room, which, at a benefit, it was, and the ability to sustain that feeling across an entire evening without it appearing constructed. He had found that skill genuinely impressive and had also, at the same time, found himself curious about the person behind it, which was a distinction he had been careful to maintain from the beginning. They had married after 2.5 years of dating, a civil ceremony and a reception with 112 guests, and had found, in the early years of the marriage, a functional and occasionally warm partnership between two people who had each built their own professional identity before combining households and who respected each other's work in the way professionals respect competence they can recognize. Vivica had brought her development skills to the foundation when Solomon started it in year 4 of the marriage, and she had been effective. She knew how to run a gala. She knew how to write a grant narrative. She knew how to speak to donors in a language that made them feel seen. These were real skills, and Solomon had valued them genuinely. He had not valued them enough to notice when they began to be used in a direction he had not authorized. Adeyemi Systems Group ran well in the way that organizations run well when the founding logic is correct and the people executing it are given the space and the compensation to do it correctly. Celestine, his operations manager, had built a client services structure in year 3 that had scaled without significant modification through year 12, which was the kind of structural success that most organizations achieve by accident and that Solomon had achieved by design. Boateng's architecture team had won 2 regional technology awards in the past 4 years, which Solomon had attended and at which he had introduced Boateng as the person actually responsible for the work, which Boateng had found embarrassing and which Solomon had told him was simply accurate and therefore necessary. He ran the company the way Emmanuel had run the school. The details were the institution was the point, and the point was not him. He had a daughter, Amara, who was 8 and who had her grandfather Emmanuel's particular focused attention and her father's preference for completing one thing before starting another, which was an excellent combination in a child and which occasionally made the bedtime negotiation more structured than bedtime negotiations were supposed to be. She attended a school in Hyde Park where she had recently developed a strong opinion about the library's organizational system, which she had communicated to the librarian in writing, which the librarian had found, according to the librarian's email to Solomon and Vivica, both surprising and not entirely without merit. He kept a composition notebook on his desk at the Adeyemi Systems office, a plain black and white marbled notebook that he used to record decisions and the reasoning behind them, the way his father had kept a ledger in the school office. He had filled 47 of them in the 12 years since he started the habit. He did not type the decisions. He wrote them because writing by hand required a speed that matched the speed of honest thinking, which was slower than typing and which caught things typing missed. He had a pen his father had given him at the airport in Lagos when Solomon left for the United States, a medium-weight ballpoint in a blue that was slightly darker than standard, which his father had used for official correspondence at the school and which Solomon had carried since. He had replaced the cartridge 11 times. The barrel was the original. He wrote in the composition notebook with that pen every time a decision mattered, and the decisions that did not make it into the notebook were the decisions he later regretted. He had been on page 41 of a book about the history of institutional philanthropy in the United States for 6 weeks. He had bought it because he was curious about the legal and structural evolution of the American nonprofit sector and had found it genuinely interesting and had then stopped reading it somewhere around the chapter on the foundation structures of the 1970s. Not because it became less interesting, but because something in his attention had been diverted and he had not yet identified what. He had been in the state of a man who noticed things without having assembled them into a picture. He had noticed that Vivica's calendar had new recurring appointments that she did not mention. He had noticed that the Foundation's annual report, which he had always reviewed before publication, had gone to print 3 months ago without coming to him. He had noticed that 2 board members who had been on the board since the Foundation's second year had resigned in the same month, which they had each attributed to scheduling conflicts in letters that used similar language. He had noticed, at the Foundation's quarterly board meeting 6 weeks ago, that the agenda had not included the founder's report that had been a standing agenda item for 8 years, and that when he had raised this during the meeting, Vivica had said they were running behind schedule and had moved to the next item before he had finished speaking. He had written that incident in the notebook. He had written it in his father's pen and had underlined it once. The photograph from Dr. Hale had assembled the picture. He had been excluded from the gala program. His name had been absorbed into a collective noun. The woman who had co-built the foundation with him was standing at a podium in front of 400 donors claiming, by the architecture of the slide deck, that she was its sole architect. He had called Dr. Hale from the parking garage immediately after seeing the photograph. Dr. Hale had been on the Foundation's board for 6 years and had been a pediatric oncologist for 30, and she had the quality of a woman who had spent her career distinguishing between information that required action and information that required patience, and who was rarely wrong about which was which. She had answered on the second ring, speaking quietly in a way that told him she had stepped out of the ballroom. He said, "Tell me what is happening in there." She said, "She is presenting a 5-year strategic vision for the Foundation. The slides list her as executive director and founder's designee. The program tonight does not include you. I received 3 separate calls this week from board members who were told you had stepped back voluntarily to focus on your business." He said, "I have not stepped back voluntarily." She said, "I know. I have been trying to reach you for 2 weeks." He said, "My Foundation email has not been receiving messages." There was a pause. Then Dr. Hale said, "Your access to the Foundation's email system was removed 6 weeks ago. I found out from the IT contractor yesterday. I was told it was a security migration." He said, "Who authorized it?" She said, "The authorization came from the executive director's office." He said nothing for 4 seconds. Then he said, "Are you with the board members who contacted you?" She said, "2 of them are here tonight, Marcus Osei and Priya Natrajan. Both are troubled by what they have seen this week." He said, "I need the 3 of you to meet me at the side entrance to the grand ballroom in 45 minutes. I need you not to say anything inside until I am there." She said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I am going to present the board with information it needs to have, in the room where it needs to have it." He had the folder. He had been assembling the folder for 3 weeks, since a conversation with the Foundation's longtime grant auditor, a woman named Mwangi, who had called him on a personal number 2 weeks before the gala to say she had a concern about the most recent financial reporting cycle and needed to speak with the board's finance committee. Mwangi had been auditing the Foundation's grants for 7 years and was the most meticulous financial reviewer Solomon had ever worked with in any context, which was a standard that included the auditors for Adeyemi Systems Group and the forensic accountants he had used for 2 acquisition reviews. She had called him on a personal number because his Foundation number was not working, which she had attributed to a system error until she tried the secondary number and the voicemail was different. He had met with Mwangi on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop in Kenwood, arriving 7 minutes before her and ordering a water because the coffee at this particular shop had never suited him and he was not going to pretend otherwise. Mwangi arrived exactly on time, set her bag on the chair beside her, and placed a folder on the table with the directness of a woman who understood that the thing she was there to discuss was the reason she was there and did not require a preamble. She had been auditing the Foundation's grants for 7 years. In those 7 years, she had flagged 11 technical irregularities, all of them minor, all of them corrected in the cycle following the audit. She had never had a conversation like this one. She said so at the beginning so that Solomon understood the weight she was placing on what she was about to show him. She said, "I have been doing this work for 22 years, and I have encountered 2 situations that required me to go outside the standard reporting channel. This is the third." She walked him through what she had found in the course of the annual audit, which she had been conducting without Vivica's knowledge that the audit had gone beyond its standard scope, because the trigger for the extended scope had been a single line item that did not reconcile, and that, when she had followed it, had led to a second line item and then a third, in the way that a structural crack leads to a secondary crack when you follow it with proper attention. What Mwangi had found was a set of discrepancies in the Foundation's disbursement records that she described, in the precise language of a woman who chose her words with care, as inconsistent with the grant criteria established in the Foundation's charter. Specifically, 3 grants awarded in the prior fiscal year that did not match any of the recipient organizations in the Foundation's approved grant pool. The grants totaled $342,000. The recipient organizations were registered nonprofits, legitimately so, but they were organizations that had received no grants from the Adeyemi Foundation in any prior year, had not appeared in any grant application cycle, and whose board leadership, when Mwangi had cross-referenced it against the Foundation's donor and vendor records, included 2 individuals who were known to the Foundation through a different channel. The first individual was a man named Darren Holt, who appeared as a board member of one of the 3 recipient organizations and who also appeared, in the Foundation's vendor records, as the principal of an event production company that had been paid for gala production services in each of the past 3 years. The payments to Holt's company had increased from $42,000 in year 1 to $98,000 in the most recent year. The gala, in Solomon's experience, had not changed in scale or complexity in a way that warranted a 133% cost increase over 3 years. The second individual appeared in a different capacity. She was listed as the program director of the second recipient organization, which had received $180,000 from the Foundation in the prior cycle. Her name was not in the Foundation's public records. Her name was in the personal communications records that Mwangi had located in an archived folder on the Foundation's shared drive, a folder that had been moved to a non-standard location 6 months ago, and that contained correspondence between Vivica and this woman that predated the grant award by 11 months. The correspondence was professional in its surface language. It was also, read in sequence and with the dates in order, the record of a developing personal relationship between Vivica and a woman named Octavia Rhodes, who had been involved in the Foundation's orbit as a consultant, then as a program director of a partner organization, and who had then received, through a grant that bypassed the standard application process, $180,000 of the Foundation's charitable funds. Mwangi had set the folder down and looked at Solomon across the table and said, "I do not know what this means about the personal situation, and I am not in a position to assess that. What I can tell you is that the financial picture is inconsistent with the charter, and my professional obligation is to the board and to the Foundation's compliance with its own governing documents. And I am telling you this before I tell the board because you are the founder and because I believe you have a right to know before the formal disclosure." Solomon had sat with the folder on the coffee shop table for a long time. He had not said much. He had asked Mwangi for a copy of everything she had assembled, told her he would ensure the board received it through the appropriate channel, and thanked her in the way he thanked people who had done something genuinely difficult at personal professional risk because it was the right thing to do. She had said she hoped the Foundation survived it. He had said he intended to make sure it did. He had spent the following 2 weeks doing 3 things. He had engaged an attorney, a woman named Fairfax who practiced nonprofit governance and fiduciary law, to review the Foundation's bylaws and advise on his standing as founder in the context of the board action that had moved him to a non-executive advisory role. Fairfax had reviewed the bylaws and the board meeting minutes from the action in question and had given him a finding that was precise and important. The board action had been procedurally irregular in 2 respects. Specifically, the notice period had been insufficient and the quorum count in the meeting minutes did not match the attendance record, which meant the action's validity was legally contestable. He had also engaged a forensic accountant named Bruder to expand on Mwangi's findings. Bruder had access to 3 years of the Foundation's financial records through channels that Fairfax had confirmed were legitimate given Solomon's standing as a contestable board member. Bruder had the methodical quality of a man who had spent 15 years in financial forensics and had learned that patience in the first 2 days of a records review produced better findings than urgency in the first 2 hours. He spent 4 days with the records before calling Solomon. When he called, he said, "There is more than what the auditor found." He said it without emphasis, the way you say a structural observation that does not require drama because the structure speaks for itself. He had found, in addition to the 3 irregular grants, a pattern of expense reimbursements to the executive director's office that exceeded the board-approved budget for that line item by $114,000 over 22 months. The reimbursements had been approved internally without the Finance Committee review that the Foundation's own expense policy required for amounts above $5,000. The third thing Solomon had done was the one that required the most patience. In the 2 weeks between the Mwangi meeting and the gala, Solomon had continued to run Adeyemi Systems Group exactly as it needed to be run. He had attended a product review meeting with the Boateng team on a Wednesday that produced 3 decisions about a client integration timeline, all of which he recorded in the notebook. He had taken a call from a prospective client in Indianapolis who had heard about their logistics automation work from an existing client and who had 15 questions and received 15 complete answers. He had reviewed the monthly P&L with Celestine on a Thursday morning and noted that the prior quarter had produced the strongest gross margin in the company's history, which was a fact he entered in the notebook under a heading he had used since year 1, Things Built Correctly Compound. He had also been present for Amara's school autumn presentation, which involved a poster she had made about the water cycle that her teacher had described in a note home as thorough to a degree that exceeded the assignment scope, which was the kind of evaluation that Amara had found satisfying in the way she always found accuracy satisfying. Solomon had told her the poster was excellent. She had said she knew. He had agreed that she knew. He had not told Amara what was happening with the Foundation. He had told her that some business things were being worked on and that when they were resolved he would explain them. She had said, "Is the Foundation going to be okay?" He had said, "Yes." She had said, "Okay then," and had returned to the water cycle poster, and he had understood that, in her assessment, his saying yes was sufficient for the time being and that she would hold him to it. He had been held to things by that child since she was 4 years old and had started noticing when the things he said happened to differ from the things that then occurred. He had taken it seriously. He had earned the credibility of a man whose yes meant yes. He intended to keep it. He had called the 3 board members he trusted most, Mwangi, Dr. Hale, and 2 others, separately and in person, and had shared the summary of what he knew and asked each of them one question. Was the board aware of these issues? None of them had been. Each of them had, in the conversation that followed, told him something about the past 6 months that added to the picture. The way the board meeting format had changed, the reduction in board access to financial detail, the 2 resignations that had been preceded by conversations with Vivica that the resigning members had afterward described as pressured. He had not been the only person being managed out. He had simply been the most significant one to move. The second victim in this story was a man named Dr. Victor Asamoah, a professor of educational policy at the University of Cincinnati who had chaired the Foundation's Grants Committee for 5 years and who had resigned 3 months ago, citing personal reasons, which he had provided in a letter that was accurate in the sense that all letters citing personal reasons are accurate about the fact of the resignation and inaccurate about the cause of it. Solomon had called Victor 2 weeks before the gala, after hearing from Dr. Hale that Victor's resignation had been preceded by a meeting with Vivica. Victor had told him, in a phone call that lasted 40 minutes, that he had been approached by Vivica 6 months ago and told that the Grants Committee was being restructured and that his role was no longer aligned with the Foundation's new strategic direction. He had been told this in a meeting that had no other attendees, with no documentation, and with a strong implication that the departure should be quiet. He had complied because he did not yet know what he was complying into. Solomon had told Victor what he knew. Victor had been quiet for a long time and then had said, "So the 3 grants I was told were emergency board actions were not board actions at all." Solomon had said, "They appear to have been authorized without committee review or board vote." Victor had said, "I would have refused them." Solomon had said, "I know. That is why the committee was restructured first." Victor said, "What do you need from me?" Solomon said, "I need you at the gala on Thursday, seated at table 11, which is the board table. I am going to need witnesses who can speak to process." Victor said, "I will be there." He arrived at the hotel at 7:43. The gala had started at 6:30. He had timed his arrival to coincide with the dinner service, when the room would be fully seated and the presentations would be underway and the audience would be present. In the 45 minutes between the parking garage and the ballroom entrance, he had done 4 things. He had called Fairfax and told her to come to the hotel immediately and to bring the certified bylaws and the procedural deficiency memo. He had called Bruder and asked him to transmit the final formatted report to Fairfax's tablet for distribution. He had called Victor Asamoah and confirmed the table number. And he had sat in the truck for 11 minutes with the folder on the passenger seat and read through the first 2 tabs one more time, not because he did not know what they said, but because he needed to confirm that what he was about to do was supported by the documentation and not only by his understanding of the documentation, which was a distinction his father had maintained between knowing something and being able to demonstrate that you knew it. The documentation supported it. He got out of the truck. He had stopped at the men's room on the way through the hotel lobby and had stood at the sink for a moment and looked at himself in the mirror. He was wearing a dark suit he had bought for a presentation to a prospective client 2 years ago, a suit that had been chosen for exactly the quality it projected now, the suit of a man who is present in a professional capacity and intends to be taken seriously. He had his father's pen in his breast pocket. He had the folder under his left arm. He looked at himself for the 3 seconds required to confirm that he looked like what he was, which was a man who had built something and had come to stand in front of it, and he walked out of the men's room and down the corridor toward the grand ballroom. In the concentrated way that people are present when they are eating and listening simultaneously and therefore less likely to be checking phones or moving around. He met Dr. Hale at the side entrance to the grand ballroom at 8:15. With her were Marcus Osei, the board's longest-serving member and a retired federal judge, and Priya Nutrajan, who managed institutional giving for a regional community foundation and who had been on Solomon's board for 4 years. Victor Asamoah was at table 11 inside. Fairfax, his attorney, was outside in the lobby with a paralegal and a certified copy of the foundation's bylaws marked to the relevant governance provisions. Bruder's report was in the folder Solomon was carrying, organized in tabs by category: grant irregularities, expense irregularities, the Mwangi audit, the board action procedural deficiencies. He looked at the 3 board members at the side entrance. He said, "What I am about to do is present the board with material information about the foundation's financial management in a setting where the board's supporters and the foundation's donors are also present. I am not doing this to make a scene. I am doing it because the board has a legal fiduciary obligation to this information, and because the donors in that room have a moral stake in knowing whether the institution they support is operating according to its governing documents." Marcus Osei said, "Is the information in that folder sufficient to support a board action tonight?" Solomon said, "The procedural irregularities in the September board action mean the action removing me to advisory status is legally contestable. Fairfax is outside with documentation. The financial findings from Mwangi and Bruder are sufficient for an emergency governance review, which can be called by any 3 board members." He paused. "I am not the one calling it. You 3 are." Dr. Hale said, "We are calling it." He said, "Then let's go in." The grand ballroom held 240 tables of 4 and had a stage at the front with a podium and 2 large projection screens flanking it, which were currently showing a slide about the foundation's grant impact metrics for the prior year, a slide Solomon recognized because he had approved the underlying data before the process had changed. Vivica was at the podium, midway through remarks that the program listed as the executive director's vision statement. She was wearing a champagne-colored gown and was speaking with the particular fluency of a woman who had prepared these remarks carefully and who was comfortable in front of an audience. The room was attentive. Solomon walked in through the side entrance with the 3 board members behind him. He did not go to the stage. He went to the AV coordinator station at the side of the room, which was staffed by a technician from the production company, and he introduced himself to the technician as Solomon Adeyemi and told him he needed a 5-minute pause in the presentation to address the board and the room on an urgent governance matter. The technician looked at him. He said, "I need to confirm with the event director." Solomon said, "The event director is on the stage." I am the foundation's founder. These 3 individuals are sitting board members who are initiating an emergency governance review under Article 7 of the Foundation's bylaws. He set the folder on the AV station and opened it to the tab marked Governing Documents. The right to address the membership at a foundation event is in the bylaws. I am exercising it. The technician looked at the folder and then at the 3 board members who were standing behind Solomon. Marcus Osei, who had the bearing of a man who had presided over federal courtrooms for 20 years, said, "This is a legitimate governance action." The technician picked up his radio. The pause came 60 seconds later. The slides went to a holding screen. The room stirred. Vivica, at the podium, looked toward the side of the room, and Solomon saw the exact moment she located him in the space, because the quality of her stillness changed completely, the way a running system changes quality when an unexpected load is applied. He walked to the stage. He did not hurry. He carried the folder and he walked at the pace of a man who has planned every step of what he is doing and is executing the plan in order. He reached the stage and climbed the 3 steps and stood at the podium, and Vivica stepped back. Not because she conceded the podium, but because she did not yet know what to do, and the not knowing produced a step backward. He set the folder on the podium. He looked at the room. 400 people looking back at him, most of whom he recognized, many of whom he had known for years, donors and community leaders and educators and the people who had given to this foundation because they believed in what it was supposed to be doing. He said, "Good evening. My name is Solomon Adeyemi. I founded this foundation 9 years ago with a gift of $2 million and an idea that access to education was the single most reliable path toward the kind of life that my parents gave me, and that I wanted to give to young people in this city who were not starting from the same position I was fortunate enough to start from. I have not spoken at this gala tonight because I was not included in the program. I am speaking now because the board of this foundation has an obligation to the people in this room, and I have information that the board has not yet seen, and the board is going to see it tonight." The room was very quiet. He said, "I am not here to make an accusation from a stage. I am here to call an emergency governance review under Article 7 of the Foundation's bylaws, which allows any 3 board members to call such a review at any membership gathering. 3 board members are calling it tonight: Dr. Constance Hale, Marcus Osei, Priya Nutrajan. If you are a board member, I need you at the board table in the next 5 minutes." He looked at Vivica, who was standing 6 feet to his left. He said, "The Foundation's auditor has findings that will be presented to the full board this evening. The attorney representing the founder's interest in the governance dispute is in the lobby and will join us at the board table. This is a legal process conducted according to the Foundation's own governing documents. It is not a confrontation." He said it clearly and without elevation in his voice, the way his father had delivered official communications at the school in Ibadan, in the Register of Institutional Authority, which was not loud and was not soft, which was simply clear. He left the stage and walked to the board table, which was table 1 in the center of the room. He sat down. He opened the folder. He did not look back at the stage or at Vivica. He had said what he came to say in the register it needed to be said in, and the work now was the work of the table. He was joined, in the following 4 minutes, by 6 additional board members who had been in the room, by Victor Asamoah from table 11, and by Fairfax and her paralegal from the lobby. Mwangi, who had been sitting at table 17, came to the board table as well with her own folder. The room remained seated. He had not expected that. He had expected some portion of the audience to leave, to find the governance proceedings uncomfortable or irrelevant to what they had come for. They did not leave. They sat and watched with the particular attentiveness of people who understood that what they were witnessing was the institution they had funded making a decision about its own integrity in real time. Several of the longer-term donors, people Solomon recognized from the first and second years of the gala, had expressions he could not read precisely, but that did not look like discomfort. They looked like people who were paying attention to something they believed mattered. Marcus Osei called the emergency review to order in the formal language he had used to open proceedings in federal court for 20 years, which was not identical to the language of a nonprofit board meeting but which had the same quality. It established that something official was happening and that the people present were obligated to take it seriously. He stated the article of the bylaws authorizing the review, named the 3 calling members, and invited the auditor to present. Mwangi opened her folder. The room did not leave. 400 people sat and watched the board of a foundation convene an emergency review at their table in the middle of the gala they had paid to attend, and most of them understood, with the instinct of people who had seen institutions work and institutions fail, that what they were watching was the former correcting the latter. Vivica was at table 2 with Darren Holt. She did not come to the board table. Her attorney, who had apparently been in the room, sent a text to Fairfax that Fairfax relayed to Solomon in a whisper. The text said her client was requesting a postponement of any formal board action to allow time for legal preparation. Fairfax said to Solomon, "They can request it. The board does not have to grant it." Solomon said, "What does the board recommend?" Marcus Osei, who was sitting 3 seats away and had heard the exchange, said, "The board does not grant postponements of emergency reviews." Fairfax nodded. The review proceeded. Mwangi presented her audit findings in the methodical language of a woman who had been presenting financial findings to governing boards for 22 years and knew that precision was the most persuasive quality available to her. She walked through the 3 irregular grants, the expense reimbursement overages, and the authorization failures point by point, with document references for each finding. Board members asked questions. She answered them. Bruder's supplementary report was distributed, 1 copy per board member. The board voted, at 9:47, on 3 resolutions. The first, to suspend the executive director pending a full governance investigation by an independent third party. The second, to restore the founder to full board standing pending the review of the September board action. The third, to engage an independent law firm to conduct the governance review within 30 days. Marcus Osei called the vote on the first resolution with the formal language of a man who had presided over consequential proceedings before and who understood that the formality was not theater but structure, that the structure was what made the outcome durable. He called each board member by name and recorded the response in the board secretary's log, which the paralegal was maintaining. The responses came in the same tone. Measured, precise, the tone of people who understood that their vote was an institutional act and not a personal one. All 3 resolutions passed. 6 in favor, 2 abstentions, 0 opposed. The room, which had been quiet throughout the board proceedings, produced a sound when the third vote was announced that was not applause and not conversation but something between them, the sound of 400 people exhaling simultaneously, which was the sound of an institution correcting itself in front of the people who had funded it. Vivica left the ballroom at 10:11, which was after the votes but before the formal adjournment. She left with Darren Holt, who had been sitting quietly at table 2 for the duration of the board proceedings and who had, Solomon noted, not spoken to anyone during that time. Holt's production company was included in the financial findings and would be addressed in the governance review. Solomon sat at the board table after the other members had dispersed and the room was beginning to empty. The catering staff was clearing dessert plates. The AV technician was breaking down the presentation equipment. He sat and looked at the empty stage and the pulled-down projection screens and the room that had held 400 people 2 hours ago and was now the particular kind of empty that a room is when something significant has occurred in it. Dr. Hale sat down across from him. She said, "Victor told me something on his way out." Solomon said, "Tell me." She said, "He said the 3 young people he personally mentored through the Foundation Scholarship Program, the ones who are in their 3rd year of college now, they called him last month to ask if the foundation was changing because they hadn't heard from their advisor. The advisor system had been restructured. No one had contacted them." Solomon sat with that for a moment. 3 young people in their 3rd year of college who had called their mentor to ask if the foundation was still there for them. That was what the restructuring had cost at the level where it mattered most. He said, "They will hear from me this week." Dr. Hale said, "I know they will." Solomon drove home from the gala at 11:47. Amara was asleep. The sitter, a graduate student named Philippa who had been sitting for Amara for 2 years and who had texted at 10 to say everything was fine, had left a note on the kitchen counter that said simply, "Hope it went well." He read the note and set it down and thought that it had gone as it needed to go, which was not the same thing as well in the conventional sense but was a version of well that he was prepared to accept. He made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of him and wrote in the composition notebook for 16 pages. He wrote the sequence of the evening from the parking garage to the vote, in the order it happened, with the documentation references noted in the margins in the way his father had noted citations in the school's official correspondence. He wrote what each person had said that mattered and why it mattered and what the vote meant in immediate institutional terms and what it meant in longer terms that were not yet visible. He wrote for 40 minutes. He signed the bottom of the last page with his initials and the date and the time, 12:44 in the morning. He closed the notebook and sat for a while. The tea had gone cold. He drank it anyway because cold tea was a thing that had happened and not a thing that needed to be corrected. The governance review concluded 41 days after the gala. The independent law firm's report confirmed the findings Mwangi and Bruder had assembled, added 3 additional financial irregularities they had identified independently, and concluded that the September board action removing Solomon to advisory status had been procedurally void due to the notice and quorum deficiencies Fairfax had identified. The executive director's suspension was converted to a formal termination by board vote following the report's release. The irregular grants were subject to a clawback demand issued to the recipient organizations, 2 of which complied within 60 days and 1 of which did not, resulting in a civil suit by the foundation that was settled 11 months later with full recovery of the disbursed amount. Darren Holt's production company contract was terminated. The overpayment was subject to a separate recovery demand that Holt's attorney contested and that the foundation's new legal counsel indicated they were prepared to litigate. Octavia Rhodes, the program director who had received the largest of the irregular grants, resigned from her position at the recipient organization on the day the governance report was made public. The matter was referred to the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division for review, which was the appropriate institutional channel and whose outcome Solomon did not attempt to influence or predict. The divorce proceeding was initiated by Solomon's filing through a separate attorney in January, for months after the gala. He had not rushed it because Amara was the priority and Amara's schedule and stability required that the proceeding not overlap with the governance review in a way that would create compounded instability in her home environment. He had been deliberate about the sequence. The sequence had been correct. Amara continued to attend her school in Hyde Park. The librarian had, Solomon learned from a parent newsletter in December, quietly implemented 2 of the organizational suggestions Amara had submitted in writing, which Amara had noted without commenting on it to Solomon, but which he had seen her register with the particular satisfaction of a child who understands that correct information acted upon is the appropriate outcome when you provide correct information. He had been reading the institutional philanthropy book again. He had picked it up 2 weeks after the gala, found it on the desk where he had left it on page 41, and had read from there through the end over the following 3 evenings. The chapter he had stalled on, the one about the foundation structures of the 1970s, had turned out to be about the legal evolution of founders' rights within charitable organizations and the mechanisms by which governing documents could protect or fail to protect an originating donor's intent. He had read it with the attention of a man who had just spent 4 months living the case study. He had bought another book the following week, a biography of a Nigerian engineer who had built water infrastructure across 3 West African countries and had spent 30 years fighting institutional resistance to ensure the projects were maintained after they were built. He had started it immediately and was on page 81 by the end of the 2nd week. He wrote in the composition notebook every evening. He had written the gala entry on the night it occurred, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight after Amara was asleep, and had filled 16 pages in his father's pen, which was the longest single entry in the 47 notebooks on the shelf. He had signed the bottom with his initials and the date and the time, 12:44 in the morning. He had looked at the entry for a while before closing the notebook and had thought about what his father would have said about the evening, and had concluded that Emmanuel would not have said much, because Emmanuel had believed that events which spoke clearly did not require additional commentary. The 3 scholarship recipients called him in the week after the gala, before he had reached out, because Dr. Hale had told them he would want to hear from them and they had believed her. The calls came on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, each one at a time the student had chosen, which told him they had thought about when to call rather than calling the moment they heard. He spent 40 minutes on the phone with each of them. He asked about their coursework, their living situations, their plans for the following semester. He asked what they needed from the foundation and listened without interrupting while they each described, in their own language, a version of the same experience. A support structure that had been there when the foundation was functioning as designed and that had quietly withdrawn over the past several months without explanation. The advising calls had stopped. The emergency fund requests had gone unanswered. The welcome letter for the new academic year had not come. Each of them had assumed it was a system issue, the kind of administrative gap that happens in organizations, because they had not wanted to believe it was something larger, because believing it was something larger would have required them to question whether the foundation that had changed their trajectories was still what it had been when they accepted it. He listened to all of that without interrupting. He was listening to where they were in their programs, what they were working toward, what they needed from the foundation to complete the next year. One of them was studying nursing. One was in a computer engineering program. One had changed her major from business to environmental policy, which she explained with the precision of a person who has thought carefully about a decision and is not interested in defending it but is willing to explain it. Solomon said it sounded like the right change. She said she thought so. He said he would make sure the foundation's advising structure was restored within 30 days. She said thank you, and he said no, the thank you went the other direction, and he meant it. He made the call about the Adeyemi Foundation at the end of January. He had considered, in the months after the gala, whether the foundation should continue or whether the events of the prior year had damaged its structural integrity beyond repair. He had taken that question seriously rather than resolving it quickly, because it was the kind of question that deserved the consideration of a man who understood the difference between an institution that had been damaged and an institution that had been revealed to have been damaged, and the difference between those two things was significant. A damaged institution could be rebuilt. An institution whose damage was revealed in the process of rebuilding it was, in a way, stronger for the revelation, because the weakness was now known and could be addressed by design. He had concluded the foundation would continue. He had called the board together in February. The reconstituted board, 6 members including Victor Asamoah, who had agreed to return as Grants Committee Chair, and had presented a revised governance structure with 3 new provisions. An independent finance committee with external oversight, a founder's standing protection clause that could not be modified without a 2/3 supermajority of the full board, and an annual transparency report to donors that disclosed the full financial picture. In plain language, the board had adopted all 3. The adoption took 40 minutes. He had walked out of that meeting and down the building's exterior steps into a February afternoon that was cold in the particular way Cincinnati February afternoons are cold, a damp and thorough cold that requires a specific kind of coat, and had stood on the steps for a moment with his hands in his pockets and felt the weight of what the afternoon had produced. Not a heavy weight, a settled weight, the weight of a thing properly placed. He drove to pick up Amara from school. She climbed into the car and said, "Good?" He said, "Good." She said, "Did the foundation thing get fixed?" He said, "It is being fixed." She said, "That is the same thing for you, isn't it?" He said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When you say something is being fixed, it means it is already decided." He said, "I suppose that is true." She said, "I knew it." She looked out the window. He drove. He stopped at a coffee shop on the way home. He ordered his usual and ordered Amara a hot chocolate, and the barista, whose name was on her badge and who he always used, said, "I heard about the foundation." He said he hoped it had been positive. She said, "My cousin got a scholarship from your foundation 3 years ago. She is in her 2nd year." He said that was wonderful to hear. She said, "Thank you for keeping it going." He said he would keep it going as long as it needed to be kept going, and he meant it in the complete sense of the phrase, which was longer than most people meant when they said something similar. He stopped at the gas station on the way out of the coffee shop lot, the same one on Madison Road that he had been stopping at for 9 years, because the tank was at a quarter, and a quarter tank in February in Cincinnati was the kind of detail that required attention rather than deferral. The attendant, a man named Clifton who had worked that station since before Solomon started stopping there, waved from inside and Solomon waved back. He filled the tank. He paid at the pump. He drove home. The foundation continued. The 3 scholarship recipients completed their 3rd year. 7 new scholars were admitted in the following grant cycle, selected through the restored grants committee process with Victor chairing and Dr. Hale serving as the reviewing committee's co-chair. The grant criteria were the same criteria Solomon had written in the original founding documents 9 years ago, because they were correct criteria and did not need to be changed, only protected. Solomon had added 1 line to the governance documents at the February board meeting, after the 3 formal provisions had been adopted. It was not a legal provision. It was a statement of purpose, added to the preamble of the bylaws that read, "This foundation exists to do what it says it does, and what it says it does is the entirety of what it does." It was his father's distinction, the one Emmanuel had made explicitly and often in the school in Abaddon, put into the governing document of a foundation in Cincinnati, Ohio, 40 years and 6,000 miles from where Solomon had first heard it. He had written it in his father's pen. The foundation would outlast the year that tried to end it. The foundation would outlast the person who had tried to end it. The foundation would do what it said it would do for as long as it continued to exist, because that was the design, and the design, as it turned out, had been correct from the beginning. Solomon Adeyemi had built it to last past himself, and it was going to. Thank you for watching this all the way through. If this one stayed with you, hit the like button and subscribe so you are here for the next story. I have 2 more coming that you are not going to want to miss.